Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live today on a Wednesday afternoon. Today is October 23rd. Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you live today on a Wednesday afternoon. Today is October 23rd, and last night the 2024-25 NBA season officially tipped off. We got some games between potential playoff contenders, starting with the Boston Celtics dismantling of the New York Knicks. We're going to be talking about what we saw from the Celtics in their quest to repeat as NBA champions. And we're also going to be touching on what we learned from the New York Knicks in their season opening loss. And then we are going to talk about the matchup between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Los Angeles Lakers, with the Lakers coming out on top. Of course, the moment between Bronny and LeBron James sort of is taking over a lot of the headlines in the media today, but we're going to be talking about some of the more actual basketball relevant conversations, such as Anthony Davis dominating in this game. Can he be the leading go-to guy for the Lakers this season from an offensive perspective? And what did the Timberwolves look like in their regular season debut of this new iteration with Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo on the roster? So we're going to be talking about both of those games. I will then be giving my top 10 teams in the NBA entering the 2024-25 season in power rankings fashion, before finishing off the show by reacting to the news that the Kansas City Chiefs are trading for wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. So a whole lot to dive into today. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. If you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, or you can use the super chat feature that is available on YouTube to leave a comment or question along with a tip or donation, and your comment will get popped up on the screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. We're going to be starting off the show by discussing the Boston Celtics in what was a dominant victory to start off their campaign to repeat as world champions. Last night, they defeated one of the top rivals in the Eastern Conference for this upcoming season in the New York Knicks. And they just jumped on the Knicks from the start of this game. A 3-point barrage, as the Celtics did go on to tie the single game record for the most 3-pointers made in NBA history with 29. It should have probably been more. The Celtics pulled all of their starters early in the fourth quarter, and the bench at one point missed 10 straight threes. I think it might have even gotten to 11 or 12 to end up coming just 1 3 short of the record, but nonetheless still massively impressive from the Celtics as a whole. And this was yet again a situation where it was centered around Jason Tatum, him being the catalyst for this offensive explosion. We saw the regular season debut of his new jump shot that he's been working on during the offseason, and it looked smooth. He finished this game 37 points, 14 of 18 from the field, and 11 of 3 from 3. He has been working on this new jump shot to try and get rid of that hitch that had developed with him during the past year or so. And we saw him shoot pretty well, all things considered, in preseason. He was 14 of 36, which is good for just under 39%. I think that if Jason Tatum is consistently hitting at a 39-ish% clip, he should be in a very good position. 8 for 11 last night, of course, but that's not something we can totally rely on a game-to-game basis. But it certainly has looked smoother up to this point in the season or up to this point, from what we've seen of this new sample size in NBA action, given the few preseason games that he played and opening night. He also had 10 assists to go along with it, as he is really the offensive hub of this team. And this idea that he was somehow carried during the playoffs last year just never made sense to me, and it still does not up to this point. He is the one with the ball in his hands to begin. I wouldn't say the majority of, because they do have many different options. They have Drew, they have Derek White, they have Jaylen Brown. All of these guys can also create for themselves, but Tatum is really the one who sort of gets this whole thing going and is the ultimate, complementary. I wouldn't even call it complementary piece, because again, he is the focal point, but he has done just such an excellent job of evolving his game to the point where he has all of these sort of the foundation with the defense, and now with the playmaking, and with the scoring ability, the ability to get to the rim. It's just a matter of finishing on a more consistent basis, and that's what we saw from him last night. So a ton of positive signs there. Jaylen Brown, of course, was very good as well for the most part. 23 points in this game, 7 of 18 from the field, 5 of 9 from 3. I mentioned the Celtics tying the three-point record. The starters as a whole were just unbelievable in this game as a whole. They were 26 of 41 from 3, which is good for 63%. That is an unruly mark to be hitting so early on in the season, but that's also Celtics basketball. And it's one of those things where I really feel like it puts it into perspective. When the Celtics are hitting at this clip, when they are, fully healthy, they're going to be chucking up threes, and you really have to be able to match that if you're an opposing team. Now, there were some concerns with the Knicks defense as well. They were not doing a good enough job of getting up on shooters. Karl Anthony Towns, we'll talk about this a little bit later. While he did look good in this game as a whole, there was a pretty clear plan for the Celtics to be able to utilize these screens, have Cat drop down into the paint in that drop coverage, and just sort of pull up for so many of these wide open opportunities. And you have to take away the Celtics 3-point shots as much as you can. The reality of the situation, though, is there is some degree where, when the Celtics are feeling themselves, it is extremely hard to keep up with. And the Knicks played relatively good offense on the other side of the ball as well to, at least keep themselves somewhat in it. I mean, that's probably being a little bit generous to them. It's not like they were getting entirely mopped off the court to the point where at this point, we know in the NBA, 20-point lead isn't something insurmountable. But it just got to a certain point where it was ridiculous with the Celtics shooting, and ultimately they were able to sort of cruise out through this one with their starters not really playing in the fourth quarter. But I want to highlight a couple defensive things as well for the Celtics. We know about the offense. We know about all of the complementary pieces. Again, that starting five in particular, they are just, and this is obviously without Kristaps Porzingis as well, but I think that this alone, even with Al Horford in the starting five, is probably the best in the NBA. You can make an argument for the Knicks once they sort of have that entire chemistry that is still being worked out, that, maybe in an Al Horford lineup, that the Knicks have it better. But then you throw Porzingis into the mix as well, and I think that this is a situation where the Celtics are going to, again, just sort of assert their dominance on the offensive side of the ball, and opposing teams have to keep up with that. And I'm not sure whether or not it's capable for the Knicks to be able to. But we're going to dive more into the Knicks in particular later on in this segment here. Talking about some of the defensive performances from the Celtics as well. One thing that I thought that they were doing an excellent job of was sort of knocking Jalen Brunson off of his game, where they threw different defenders of him. It was really highlighted by Jaylen Brown, who certainly seems motivated, and he's talked about it in the past as well, motivated to be all defense this year. Jaylen Brown did a very good job against Jalen Brunson in this game. You have, Tatum picking him up for occasions as well. And one thing that you saw from the Celtics defense as well is the fact that they really were selling out for Brunson. There were a number of players on the court that, the Celtics just did not really show much respect to. And one of them being Josh Hart, who was, of course, a very big part of the Knicks' plan for this season. The Celtics did not pay him very much respect at all along the perimeter. You see when Jericho Sims is getting minutes for them, where I don't think that Sims is going to be getting playoff minutes for them, assuming everything goes to plan for the Knicks. But the Celtics willing to sell out against Jalen Brunson for a lot of this game, and I thought that they did a pretty good job doing so. One of the biggest things about the Celtics defense is their discipline, specifically for matchups like against Jalen Brunson, where obviously Brunson, this idea that he's a free throw merchant is a little bit unfair. A merchant, that's not where he makes his living, but Brunson is obviously also very sharp in terms of getting defenders to leave their feet and him getting himself to the free throw line. The Celtics were not budging on this, similar to what was the case against the Mavericks the last time we saw them playing meaningful basketball games in the finals last year, where you look at the likes of, especially where it becomes most noticeable to me is when the bench comes in and it's Sam Hauser and it's Peyton Pritchard, and they're not the best defenders in the world, but it's the IQ there. And I think that that's something that comes directly down from Joe Mazzulla and the way that this Celtics team preps behind the scenes, that they understand who their biggest matchups are, who their biggest contenders and competitors are in the NBA, and they do a very good job, I think, of sort of cutting out Jalen Brunson's, go-to moves when he gets in a bind. It is those pump fakes and being able to get defenders off balance. The Celtics don't really fall for that. And, I think it's just a testament to the preparation and how the Celtics team, because even, through the course of the past handful of years, probably going back to 2022, really, when they fully established themselves as finals contenders, the reason why they went on that run down the second half of the season was because they started really anchoring down on defense, and that's something that early on in the 2023 and in the Mazzulla tenure, the defense wasn't quite clicking in the way that it should be. I think that they have rounded that corner. They're certainly not flawless. There were definitely moments last night where Al Horford out on the perimeter got exposed a little bit, and that's an area that, we have sort of seen that become a little bit of a consistent theme. Al still very much valuable on the offensive side of the ball, the way that he has been able to remain a consistent shooter, one of the better passing bigs in the NBA, in my opinion, and part of it's, more so IQ based than, outstanding passing abilities and, the passes themselves that he can make. So he just continues to make the right decisions, and for that reason, he's able to fit in so flawlessly with what is a very unselfish Celtics team right now. And I think that there's obviously a ton of positives to come out of this game with. I mean, the Celtics are, at least as of this moment, they're not fully healthy per se. They are without Kristaps Porzingis, but it does feel like it's a situation where the Celtics, if they're fully healthy, they are the best team in the NBA. And it's this idea now of, can the Celtics just not beat themselves? Which is something that we've sort of seen them fall into some poor tendencies in the past, but I think that this is a situation where I know it's a little bit overplayed at this point, but the fact that the Celtics were a historically great team last season and they were able to somehow have all of this doubt coming out of the year and all of the people sort of fanning the flames there, I think it's going to lead to, a fact where it's not even like the Celtics are manufacturing bulletin board material. They have legitimate gripes with the way that they have been respected by the NBA and basketball community over the course of the past year. That, I mean, they are still coming out, firing, looking for vengeance. And I mean, the Celtics are certainly my pick for the 2025 finals as of right now. As we know, the NBA playoffs are very much predicated on health more than probably any other sport across the, main four American sports leagues. That, it's hard to say they will unquestionably be. I think that that's a little bit egregious. We have to see how this season plays out, of course. But the Celtics, they reestablished themselves. They are the best team. It's just a matter of sort of staying consistent, not getting too stagnant or comfortable and, finishing out the job. And I think that they're going to be motivated to do so. I think that Joe Mazzulla in particular is one of the, is an excellent catalyst for that moving forward. That I think the Celtics are in a great position. We do have a comment here from Anthony Manzano. He says, I hope I'm not taking this comment out of context. I was watching an interview recently with Joe Mazzulla, and he said that the franchise and the team are okay with last year's championship and they don't care if they repeat. That's not quite the scenario. Mazzulla was more so talking about this idea that they just don't have any pressure. I think that obviously they care about winning another championship. One of Mazzulla's quotes from the past, 48 hours or so is about the fact that, they do still have to reestablish themselves. Just because they were great last season doesn't mean that I think specifically he was going along the lines of the 2024-25 Celtics have not proven a thing yet. Now, very convincing, and I'm sure, off to a great start, about as good of a start as you could have asked for. But that's the whole thing, is Mazzulla is going to hold these guys accountable to not let up. And again, I think there's enough fuel on the fire for the Celtics that they're not going to sort of cave in that easily to all of these expectations and what's being said about them. But, the Celtics, they're now off in their own direction. They're cruising. It's about who can keep up to them. And the New York Knicks are one of the top contenders in the NBA this season. Last night, of course, did not go the way that they wanted. But it's game one of a very new team. The lack of continuity definitely caught up to them. I want to dive into the specifics of what we learned about the Knicks from their performance last night. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, I'll diss my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some loose shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are reacting to the tip-off games from last night's NBA season opener. And we just talked about the Boston Celtics and how incredible they looked in their season debut. The Knicks, on the other hand, it was not going to be quite that easy. The Celtics are running it back with basically the exact same rotation, and we know how great they were last year. The Knicks, on the other hand, definitely had a very successful season, winning 50 games, making it to the second round of the playoffs. But now is where they're sort of pushing their chips in. They just bought on, acquired all-star caliber talent in Karl Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges. There's a lot of kinks that they have to work out. So I want to talk about what we potentially learned about the Knicks from last night. And I think that the number one sort of lesson about this sort of comes down to what we saw out of their offense, because this is a situation where they now have one of the most talented starting fives in the NBA. There's probably an argument to be made that they are the single best starting rotation. I would argue that when Kristaps Porzingis is available for the Celtics, that's the best starting five. The Knicks aren't far behind from at least a talent on paper perspective. And that being said, it's going to take some time, absolutely, for these players to mesh together. Now, a few of these pieces are returning. Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby was with the Knicks for the second half of their 2023-24 campaign. But now with Bridges and Towns, this is a situation where it's going to look a little bit different. And I think that the number one sort of thing that jumped out to me is they need to be able to find a way to manufacture more three-point attempts. The Knicks were at the bottom of the NBA in three-point attempts last year. Specifically, they were bottom 6 in three-point attempts per game. And obviously, you can do things defensively to knock the Celtics off of their game a little bit from a shooting perspective. We've seen Miami do that in the past, but even Miami in the playoffs last year, there was that one game that the Celtics did shoot poorly from three. It's not, at some point you can't just entirely eliminate the Celtics offense and three-point shooting arsenal. You have to be able to fight fire with fire a little bit. And I don't know if the Knicks are super in position to do that. They currently have 3 players on their roster that averaged 5 or more three-point attempts per game. That is Jalen Brunson, of course, and then there are 2 new additions in Karl-Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges. Meanwhile, the Knicks lost their number 1 three-point volume shooter in Dante DiVincenzo for this Towns deal that I definitely think there were moments of, bright spots for Cat in the Knicks offense last night. The fact that he was getting these one-on-one opportunities in the post, him finally having some spacing around him now that he's not matched up with or on the court with another big, and specifically Rudy Gobert, who doesn't provide any spacing for himself in his own right. So Towns in some spacing. I thought that he played pretty well in this game. Ultimately, he finished with just 12 points, but again, working that post, I thought he did a really good job. He finished 5 of 9. I mean, the Celtics threw a couple different looks at him, including Jrue Holiday, who they used against him last year when Towns was with the Timberwolves, that Jrue Holiday was able to do a pretty good job. They have a roamer behind him because, again, Rudy Gobert is just not all that much of a threat. This time, though, he's playing with a little bit more spacing. He's getting these opportunities, and he converted. So I thought that there were definitely positives there. That being said, Towns is probably going to have to up his 3 points attempted per game, at least a little bit. I mean, when you look on paper, they have 4 players that are certainly capable of being three-point shooters, maybe 5 if you want to throw in Josh Hart. That is one of the issues, though, and something that I want to highlight as well, is that the Celtics really were not giving Josh Hart much respect whatsoever from 3, that they were very comfortable with him, wide open around the perimeter, which is sort of similar to what the case was last year when the Knicks were facing the 76ers in the playoffs. And in those situations, Josh Hart made the 76ers pay. So ultimately, we know that Josh Hart is capable of it, but he does need to sort of get to a point where opposing teams have to respect his three-point shot, because what the Celtics were doing last night was really helping off of Josh Hart and selling out on Jalen Brunson. Again, a similar strategy to what the 76ers did in the first round last year, and ultimately Hart was able to hit those shots to make the 76ers pay. But, it's a new season, and Josh Hart right now is sort of the clear weakness, I suppose, at least in terms of, offensive firepower along the perimeter, that he is going to need to, at least pose a little bit more of a threat. Now, this obviously is not the same Knicks team that we're going to see in the playoffs. We saw them dive deeper into their bench. You had a number of guys playing for them that pretty unlike Tom Thibodeau to be able to see them. It was basically a 9-man rotation during the legitimate parts of the game. Now, the Knicks were down early, so maybe that helped Tibbs clear his bench a little bit more. But you look at it and, Jericho Sims got 24 minutes from them. Deuce McBride, somebody who is expected to have a 6-man type role for them. And I thought that McBride looked really good in the minutes that he did play. So that's definitely a real positive for the Knicks as well. And I was just talking about, three-point volume, really. Deuce McBride is somebody who should be able to take on a bigger role. You look at Campaign, Pacome Dadier, both of them got minutes as well. So really, Tibbs went 9 men deep in this game. And I think that that's something to monitor at least is, when does he start to wane off some of those minutes for some of the bench guys? I mean, obviously, eventually Mitchell Robinson is going to be a part of this team as well. Probably where we see Sims' minutes drop out. I don't know if we're going to see a ton of Dadier or Payne, really. Dadier, I don't want to make a, foregone conclusion off of him. I truthfully have not watched enough basketball with him. I was kind of surprised to see him playing actual minutes in this game, or I think it was in the second quarter that he might have checked in for the first time. But Payne can only give you so much, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to, look like a different team when it comes to the playoffs. Their rotations are going to be different. I don't know still, though, how much, they don't have reinforcements coming from a three-point shooting perspective, which, means that they're going to be very reliant on that starting five plus a little Deuce McBride to be able to space out. And maybe there's another move coming for the Knicks at some point. I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical about that considering the fact that they do still have to pay Mikal Bridges after this season. They're going to eventually have to pay Jalen Brunson in a couple years again. I know he just signed a contract extension, but the whole point of it was to get him to a couple seasons from now when he's eligible once again for a massive payday. So ultimately, we'll see there. I just don't know if the Knicks are going to be able to I don't know if they're going to be able to shoot well enough to be able to keep up. And, what would really help that is if Mikal Bridges does find his jump shot. Obviously, a ton of noise about the new hitch in his jumper and the fact that, he has not looked good through preseason. Last night, shot 2 of 7 from 3. So that's now a subplot that is going to continue to build up with the Knicks moving forward. I'm not, sounding any alarms that this has, fallen by the wayside already. Bridges can still do a lot of good, even if the shooting does take a little bit of a step back, but he needs to be reliable. And, it has not looked that way up to this point in the year. Again, not pressing the panic button on them necessarily and on Mikal Bridges just yet, but something to note. OG Anunoby was pretty much invisible in this game, and I understand, where his real calling card is on the defensive side of the floor, which doesn't get quite as much shine. But, he really had... it's not like he was, doing anything defensively that was throwing the Celtics off. They were getting just about any shot that they wanted. And, this idea of having the Tatum stoppers in OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges going to need to apply more pressure because a lot of the times it was the Celtics as a whole and Jason Tatum just stepping up into these open three-point looks, and that is unacceptable for the Knicks. And part of that does tie into, like we talked about earlier in the show, Karl Anthony Towns. As much as I think that there's a lot of good that can come from him. He is capable of spacing the floor more, and that, even when he goes in the paint, he can work you there. That is one of the areas where I feel like the Celtics could be more susceptible. It's the Jokic-type bigs who can be a force inside, but, also have the skill to make plays for teammates as well. I think that that's where we can start to see, and Karl Anthony Towns in general, I think that there were, steps of where he needs to the Knicks haven't quite figured out what the exact role for him was. I thought it was a lot more isolation as opposed to, I'd be really curious to see more Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns action together, pick and roll, pick and pop. That wasn't really much of an emphasis. I think that that's also a situation where you talk about those lobs and such that Jokic is able to throw to Aaron Gordon when he's working the post. Who's going to be that sort of backdoor cutting guy that feels like a role where Josh Hart could slide into a little bit? Obviously doesn't have the height of a Gordon. Is that something that if Hart isn't going to be a threat quite as much from the perimeter, could they put him inside the three-point line and see if he can sort of nickel and dime defenses that way? Something to be, at least intrigued in that. Again, Cat, I think he's going to certainly find his role offensively. That being said, defensively, his reputation was never that he's a good defender. And I think that we have sort of, as a basketball community, kind of forgiven him and almost forgotten that there are real struggles on that side of the floor for him because he played with Rudy Gobert these past couple seasons, and he had good moments, such as the playoffs, where he was the primary defender on Jokic, but the whole idea was to have Rudy Gobert as a roamer behind him. Maybe that's a lineup. I mean, I'd be very curious to see what Tibbs could do if it is, sort of bump Josh Hart out of that lineup. Something along the lines of Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Towns, and Robinson. I mean, that is a lineup that I think could be very interesting from a defensive perspective. That being said, though, Towns is going to need to hold his own more along the perimeter. The Celtics were just willing to pull up over him in these drop coverages, him not playing out on the perimeter. That's something more for a specific matchup with the Celtics down the line. I think that the Knicks can get away with it a little bit more, at least, early on in the season when the pressure is lower. But right now, obviously, a number of kinks that the Knicks are going to need to work out. I think that there's a very high upside there. I do think that they're a class below the Celtics, and, I feel very confident in my preseason pick that the Celtics are going to be able to come out of the Eastern Conference. It's about what are the next steps for the Knicks. Can they take those internal developments forwards to be able to hang around with a three-point barrage from the Celtics? Can they win in some more, scrappy defensive games as well? Because I do have doubts with Towns' defense. And at the end of the day, Jalen Brunson is still a little bit of a liability defensively. And we saw the Celtics attacking him as well last night. So it's a team that there are wrinkles right now that can be ironed out. It's going to be, this is game 1 of 82. So a long season to go from here on out. I think that the Knicks are capable of working some of these things out. I don't know if they're going to be able to reach the heights of the Celtics, assuming that Boston stays healthy. But let me know in the comments section. Let me know what you thought about this game in particular, as we are going to be switching from the East Coast to the West Coast, where we've been talking about this game in Boston. The other game last night, the Los Angeles Lakers handing it to a little bit the Minnesota Timberwolves in their season opener. We got our first look at the new look Timberwolves. Anthony Davis seems like he might be somebody who, I wouldn't say take the next step. Anthony Davis has been long established at this point, but he was an absolute force last night, and he looks like he might be in the running for some awards this upcoming season. We're going to be diving into that game as well, but before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the other game from opening night in the NBA, in the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Lakers coming out, winning this one 110-103. They controlled the majority of the game, and they did so with very blatant steps forward from their strategy last season to this year. And a little bit of the JJ Redick effect already, on display. And that's the biggest thing. We're going to talk about Anthony Davis as well, who was tremendous in this game. But really, where the Lakers were able to sort of make up from some of the differences last year was the different, fixations and focuses throughout the course of the game. The broadcast was very vocal about it. This idea of them crashing the boards offensively more often. And, I think that there are some blaring red flags right now with Minnesota's defense and their efforts as a whole that we're going to get into later. But you have to give credit to the Lakers who, came out and had that extra bit of energy. And there was that, extra emphasis on being able to do some of the simple things. Rebounding, transition, both offensively and defensively. And they were able to generate extra opportunities and possessions for themselves where Minnesota wasn't. It's not like the Lakers last night shot at some, unbelievable clip. They finish off this game shooting just 41% from the field. The difference is that they were able to it was 44% from the field, They were able to take 10 more shots than the Timberwolves were. They weren't turning the ball over. And these are, again, the little things that, add up to make a big difference ultimately. And Rui Hachimura, by the way, and who had a good game as well. So, on the floor backing it up as well, but had a quote about Julius Randle and about how the idea is that Julius Randle just kind of stands there sometimes, so they wanted to be extra aggressive. So a little bit of a rocky start there for Minnesota in the Julius Randle era here, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. But, I thought that we saw real differences from the Lakers as well. We saw some very interesting usage of Anthony Davis. The Lakers were running this zone where Davis was, hovering around that free throw line, came out on the perimeter on certain instances, just, providing different looks defensively. And then in the middle as well, he was a monster there, finished this game with 3 blocks on the inside. I think one of them actually came on the perimeter on a blocked jump shot of Dante DiVincenzo. So, Anthony Davis certainly making a pretty good argument for himself early on in this season for Defensive Player of the Year. And then on top of that, offensively as well, backing it up. 36 points. He was 11 of 23 from the field. We saw him extending out to the mid-range a little bit more as well. Pretty encouraging there. And just the idea of, it's going to get to a point where LeBron can't do everything for this Lakers team. And I don't know how much faith that you have in D'Angelo Russell to be the lead man. I certainly do not have that type of confidence myself. Now, I like Austin Reeves and everything, but, when LeBron first came to LA and they traded for Anthony Davis, it was supposed to be this idea of the torch passing. We still need to see, the consistency maybe with AD in this offense, but he seems to be a huge beneficiary of what JJ Redick is doing early on. And, overall here, other Lakers thoughts, I suppose. LeBron, like I mentioned, can't do this forever. I wouldn't say he was neutralized necessarily, but definitely a little bit of an underwhelming game, I suppose. 16 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. A lot of that was because Anthony Edwards was taking on the LeBron assignment defensively, and LeBron just didn't really look like he wanted to run with Ant and, bang with him on a play-to-play basis. LeBron, when he got a lot of his, it was in transition. It was backdoor cuts, sort of catching the Timberwolves off guard. A lot of those IQ things that LeBron does, which sort of leads me into the Timberwolves on the other side of this. By the way, Dalton Connect also looked pretty good as well. I'll throw that out as well on both sides of the ball. I thought that he was pretty impressive and that he can certainly be a rotation caliber player. Last night played 16 minutes, and I think that early on that's going to be around where the minutes range of where he should be playing. But on the Timberwolves side of this, not great. Definitely not great. I mean, you have Anthony Edwards, pissed off early in this game. It was during the second quarter where he's on the bench, in disgust, looking at what's going on. He's yelling at his teammates, trying to get them fired up. And I say this in a leadership way. This is certainly not a bash on Anthony Edwards, but you could see the early frustration with him. And it's game one. It's just a lot of emotions sort of packed up into this. At the end of the day, it's 1 out of 82 games, so it's nothing that the Timberwolves can't recover from. But that being said, certainly did not look anywhere near as sound on the defensive front or from the perspective of, just effort in general, really, where, Julius Randle, yeah, he's still able to give you his offensively. He finishes this game 16 points, shooting 50% from the field. He finished with 9 rebounds. So you look on paper like this was not a terrible Julius Randle game, but this was another game that I watched, and I was sort of on board with what the Timberwolves did. I thought that was a little bit. I thought that the Towns for Randle and DiVincenzo deal was a win-win. I think that it still ultimately can be, but Julius Randle has to be better than he was last night, because what did he really provide them? All of his offensive looks came out of isolation pretty much, and a lot of them looked very ugly. He's able to convert on a couple, gets to the free throw line 7 times last night, as he does, but it just looks so disjointed when he's involved, and that's the thing, is he needs to learn how to play into a system. It's why the Knicks were so willing to move off from him, because he is a little bit of a ball stopper, and he doesn't necessarily play this smooth game. It's a lot of herky-jerky, it's a lot of isolation, and he can get results for you, but that can only take you so far. The lack of effort is just so disgusting with him, and it drives me crazy. There was, a moment in the third quarter where it was almost back-to-back plays that I noticed. It was him allowing an offensive rebound to Austin Reeves crashing in on a Lakers free throw attempt. Randle just no interest really in boxing out. And then it was a couple minutes later, around the 8.5 minute mark in the third quarter, just pathetic on the effort in transition defense on one of these occasions as well. Just not getting back on defense. This was, he was just kind of standing around the elbow on offense, I guess, somewhat in position for trying to get an offensive rebound, and then basically turned around, watched and jogged a little bit on his way back as the Lakers had a 2-on-1, and they ended up getting to the free throw line. And Julius Randle is just such a frustrating player that I know the talent's there, but it's just a matter of actually executing in these moments and being locked in. Just those hustle plays are so frustrating as somebody who does believe in the overall talent level, but other than that, with the Timberwolves, like I mentioned, rebounding, just unacceptable how many offensive rebounds they ended up allowing in this game. It's, it goes down as 15-12. The Timberwolves sort of started to ramp up that effort a little bit more down the stretch of the third quarter to close the gap some, and ultimately, that 10-ish point lead is where the Lakers were sort of hovering throughout this game, especially, from the second quarter on. But I thought that I did sort of think that this was a little bit more about the Timberwolves and the way that they have to continue to improve from here on out, figuring out kind of what their looks are. Overall, like, it's just tough when you look at the situation that they don't really... I mean, Mike Conley is certainly still a point guard in his caliber of being a real rotation guy, but, I mean, he is... It's clear that he's aging at this point. Struggled with efficiency last night. Outside of that, they really don't have a point guard. That's where you have a Dante DiVincenzo who comes off the bench and can be a little bit of a combo guard for you. He didn't necessarily have his shot last night, but I do anticipate him having a bigger and more impactful role for the Timberwolves moving forward this season. Overall, I mean, Ant wasn't necessarily fully on his game either. Part of it because he was exerting himself so much on the defensive side of the floor. But just a pretty disheartening and uninspiring performance from the Timberwolves in this game. But, I mean, I guess the last note on this is, of course, the fact that the Lakers did have this moment with LeBron James and Bronny. And I do feel like I have to apologize a little bit. I didn't understand the full explanation when I saw the reports that Bronny was going to play in this game. The fact that they did it basically just to get the story over with and move on, totally understandable. It was a cool moment for sure. It's also very clear that Bronny does not really belong on an NBA court at this current moment in time. It's fine. He's not expected to. He was the 55th overall pick. He should just go and continue to develop behind the scenes. Got the moment over with. I thought it was pretty well done from JJ Redick to actually, pull that off. But want to address a comment here before we close out this segment from Anthony Manzano. Says the trade that Minnesota made for Big Cat was during the third game of the preseason, and those players didn't come in till the end of preseason. I guess you're talking about trading Karl Anthony Towns. And then I don't know. I'm not totally following the comment there. Anthony also says, do you think people are blowing it out of proportion when it comes to the amount of power LeBron has in the league to where even his son, if his son is not performing, he's going to get the Rookie of the Year? No, it's not going to be that far. LeBron is, he got his son on the roster. He got his son a fully guaranteed deal. Outside of that, I mean, Bronny's not going to be in consideration for Rookie of the Year, just objectively speaking. He's not going to play. I think that he got his minutes in this game. Like I said, JJ Redick got the story over with. It happened. The moment now, it's not going to be on a game-to-game basis of when is Bronny going to play, that he has to field questions like that. They're just going to be able to push forward here, and I think that Bronny is going to fade into the background, which is where things should be. Now, Dalton Connect, that's a rookie that I can get behind, and I think that he can be a real contributor for this Lakers team moving forward. A nice win for the Lakers. I still don't think that this is exactly what their roster is going to look like. I think eventually they make a move at some point in this season, but that's sort of a topic for another day, as we are now going to be closing the books on this one. Be sure to let us know in the comment section what your takeaways and thoughts were on the game, as we are going to now be handing out a power ranking of the top 10 teams in the NBA entering the season. So we're going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are going to now be doing a little bit of NBA power rankings entering the season. Probably should have gotten on this a little bit earlier before the season started. We do have a little bit of a sample size, and either way, I don't think that I'm going to be too drastically impacted by last night's games, but I do think that last night's games did also have a little bit of a lesson here. This is based off of how good the teams are currently on paper and what we can expect from them out of the gates here. Teams like the Knicks and the Timberwolves, it's clear they still have some, wrinkles to iron out moving forward in this season, that they made some big changes in the offseason. And, additionally, you have a team like the 76ers who are currently dealing with injuries to Paul George and Joel Embiid, and we still haven't seen them, play yet. So the 76ers are off of this list. This does not mean that they wouldn't be in my top list of top 10 teams with title aspirations, but these are the top 10 teams that I think can have a hot start to the season. So without further ado, number 10 is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Again, this is based off of a list of where they are at today. And they have some, very real things that they need to work through. What is that fit with Julius Randle going to look like? Do they have good enough guard play to, be one of the elite teams again this season? I don't feel great about, what I saw last night. I still think that Anthony Edwards is a big enough star. They do have a good amount of talent on that roster as a whole. We didn't see any of Rob Dillingham or Terrence Shannon Jr. last night as well. I think that those are pieces that eventually can step up for them and have at least some sort of an impact. But as of right now, Timberwolves, they lose their first game. They have some things to work out. They are at number 10 with a very great chance to move up as the season goes on. But they lost to none other than the Los Angeles Lakers, so I had to include the Lakers in here as well. They're a team that, they're at least running back the vast majority of their roster. When you look at the players who got real minutes for them last night, really the only guy that they're not familiar with is Dalton Knecht, who I thought had a very nice impact off of the bench in last night's game as well. Notice Max Christie getting some minutes as well. Now, he got himself into foul trouble early, so I don't think the Lakers got to use him quite as much as they were hoping to, but somebody who definitely could hold a role moving forward. The D'Angelo Russell future on this team is, definitely up in the air a little bit, so I think that this is a team that they understand who they are, and they have Jared Vanderbilt coming down the ranks as well. I think that JJ Redick is going to have a very real impact on I think the Lakers are going to understand what they are. JJ Redick is going to have a good impact on the team moving forward, and we'll see. I don't have them as a solidified championship contender, but they should not be a bad team by any means, and they'll probably be hovering around this top 10 for the remainder of the season. Number 8, I have the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs on paper are a very talented roster. It's just a matter of the fit. Now they bring in Kenny Atkinson, where a lot of, NBA insiders are very optimistic about what this team looks like moving forward, and Atkinson being able to balance out the different aspects. I still think that they're a bit redundant from a roster perspective. 2 guards in Garland and Mitchell do a lot of the same. 2 bigs in Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley do a lot of the same. Something that we've been talking about now for a couple years. This is sort of the make or break. I'd say, this at least first half of the season. If things go poorly, they will be making a move. And either way, I do think that there's going to be a trade in the next year or so. But, the Cavaliers are certainly one of the tougher teams in the NBA this season. And if Kenny Atkinson can cook something up and find a way to balance out the looks from this Cavs team, they can certainly be dangerous. I have them coming in at number 8. Right above them, I have the Indiana Pacers, which I know the Pacers are a team that, the public has sort of been very volatile with over the course of the past year, really going back to that in-season tournament where they got propped up so much, only for them to struggle down the second half of the season. Tyrese Halliburton dealing with an injury, a couple injuries at that as well. Didn't look quite like the All-NBA version of himself that we saw in the first half. He's ultimately rewarded with third team anyways. Had a very solid season. Very, very good season. Solid is underselling it. And the Pacers know who they are. And that's the biggest thing for me, is they have an identity. They run, they dominate in transition, their offense is lethal, they get Benedict Mathurin back as well. The Pacers are a dangerous team. They certainly have kinks that they need to work out on the defensive side, but where the Pacers sort of differentiate themselves from the Cavs is, I think we know sort of what the Pacers are. Still, a little bit up in the air on what this Cavaliers team is going to look like moving forward. I have the Pacers coming in at 7. Number 6, I have the Phoenix Suns. Suns are poised for a bounce-back season, at least to some degree in my eyes, where I look across the Western Conference and I think there's a lot of good teams, and you look at the overall, that matchup, just like last season, the race to avoid the play-in tournament is very much going to be on once again. The Suns were successfully able to do so last year, and yet it was an unsuccessful season, especially, more so it's about losing in the first round to the Timberwolves and it looking largely uncompetitive in that. But the Suns now, year 2 of this new experiment. I think that KD and Devin Booker are only going to continue to develop a relationship. Now I think that the fact that they're backed up into a corner a little bit, they're probably going to be a little bit more receptive to what Budenholzer has them do. I think that they're going to be shooting a higher volume of 3-point shots. I like the fact that they went out and got a real point guard in Tyus Jones as well. I think the Suns, from a chemistry perspective, are going to take a step forward this year. And you look at the talent that they have across the board. Last year was a bit of a disaster with the turnovers, the fourth quarter offense, all of those things. I think if there's just a little bit more of a system in place, this is a team that can thrive. I think that they are going to be in a very good position moving forward this season. I have them coming in at number 6. Number 5, I have the New York Knicks. Losing last night, you can make an argument, maybe they could be lower. I still think that they are a very talented roster as a whole. And, there are certainly things that they have to work out, as you would expect with a team that, lost so many minutes from last season to this year. But they're one of the best teams in the NBA. I don't think that there's denying that when you look at the amount of talent that they have on their roster, the capabilities that they will have. Now, the Knicks could be a faller early on if they are struggling out of the gates, but certainly one of the top title contenders in the NBA this season. Nelson of the basketball podcast here at GSMC, he has them winning the finals. I'm not going that far with them, but the Knicks are going to be one of the teams that are standing late in the season. I have them at 5 as of right now. Number 4, I have the Milwaukee Bucks. A lot of people not in on the Bucks, and the biggest concern I do have with them is the defense. Now, we saw spurts of, getting better, especially, after the All-Star break and such, when Doc Rivers was able to help, bring a little bit more energy on that side of the ball. The transition defense last season was atrocious for the Bucks. I think that year 2 of Damian Lillard and Giannis is going to, start to really be a scary combination. Last year, we didn't really see them have that chemistry. I think that it is coming this year. I like the fact that, Gary Trent Jr. is an upgrade at shooting guard, in my opinion, based off of what they had last year. I don't love the Bucks at 4 here, but I think there's a lot of questions with, this sort of tier of teams, and I'm betting on the upside of Damian Lillard and Giannis coming out of the gates. That's going to be good enough to get the Bucks out to a hot enough start. Number 3, I have the Denver Nuggets. A lot of GMs are thinking that the Nuggets are stuck, and I don't disagree from a financial perspective that the Nuggets might be backed up into a little bit of a corner. That being said, they have the best player in the league in Nikola Jokic. They have a number of complementary role players. Now, question marks maybe. I don't think that Jamal Murray is a declining asset like these anonymous executives do. I think that Michael Porter Jr., is he limited? Sure, but he's still, a very good player, plays his role to a T. Say the same about Aaron Gordon. Maybe some questions about their bench, but I think that the Nuggets are certainly, going to be in the mix moving forward. And again, you have Nikola Jokic. All of these teams that are sort of below them in the power rankings may be looking for a bit of an identity. The Nuggets have one, and his name is Nikola Jokic. So I think that they're going to start this season, where they should. As the year goes on, we'll see sort of whether or not they have the personnel in-house to be able to fill the role of a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope at that 2 spot that, is currently a little bit up for grabs within that organization. But the Nuggets should certainly be in a good position moving forward this year again. And, I'm not writing them off by any means just yet. Number 2, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder are just, across the board, one of the most talented teams in the NBA. That they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, their leading star. They have all of these really nice complementary pieces as well. I like what they did this offseason in adding Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. Hartenstein expected to miss some time early on in the year, so that definitely hurts. If you see the Thunder maybe a little bit shaky out of the gates, it could, have at least a little bit to do with that. That being said, Hartenstein, I think he's more of a specialist for the Thunder when it comes to the playoffs. Going to need him to match up against the Anthony Davises and the Nikola Jokic's of the world. Not that Hartenstein is a stopper and a, unquestionable defensive anchor like that. But up to this point, they've been playing, these past couple seasons with basically one center on the roster in Chet Holmgren, and he wasn't even available for the 2022-23 season. So this is a team that, you look at the defensive versatility from their starting lineup. It is unbelievable. I love a lot of their bench pieces as well. Cason Wallace, a very bright young spot for them last year. Isaiah Joe, a very nice scorer off the bench as well that doesn't get enough credit. This is certainly a team that is going to, have a little bit of the upper hand moving into the playoffs. They were the 1 seed in the West last year. I think that's going to be the case again this upcoming season. And then number 1, of course, it's the Boston Celtics, reigning NBA champions that ran back basically their entire roster from last year to this year, and they just thumped out one of their top contenders in the Eastern Conference on opening night. Not to say that the Knicks can't get better as time goes on, but the Celtics are, they're already established. They know exactly who they are. They are extremely talented. Last season was one of the most dominant years we've had in recent NBA history. And, the Celtics were basically, barring anything crazy happening, the Celtics are probably going to be on cruise control a little bit during this regular season. Maybe we see Jason Tatum pushing for an MVP. It seems like Jaylen Brown is going to be pushing for all defense. So there are going to be storylines to follow with the Celtics, of course. But really, it's about the playoffs for the Celtics at this point and maximizing this window that they have on the table. So Celtics coming in as a pretty clear number 1. I want to address some of the comments here in the comment section, specifically starting with Anthony's on the Denver Nuggets, where he says, I think you have Denver a little bit too high. I understand they won a championship, but I think they're one of these NBA champions the last few years that's not going to make it past the first round. My counter to that is that, I do hear what you have to say in terms of, we've seen a history of NBA champions fail to sort of back that up to this point. I thought the Nuggets were going to, repeat headed into last year. I think that they're the only team that really could have threatened the Celtics because of the Nikola Jokic impact. And I don't think that there are really teams that are built to stop the Nuggets like the Timberwolves were last year. Like that front court of Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert was sort of an exactly constructed roster to stop somebody like Jokic. That's not really on the table for them quite as much anymore, where I think that Jokic is going to be able to just be good enough to continue to drag the Nuggets into, real contention. And we'll see how all of this plays out. Again, it's not like they're without any questions. That 2-guard spot is going to be something to certainly keep an eye on. You look at all of the contributing players that have left Denver over the course of these past few years. Bruce Brown, KCP, Jeff Green. They've definitely, had some losses and haven't exactly shown that they have anybody to fully make up for that. It's going to be interesting to see, what that bench unit looks like. But, I think that coming into the year, again, it's one of these things where they understand what their identity is. They're going to play through it. Certainly teams with higher ceilings than the Nuggets, but as far as, opening night and on for this first month of the season, I think the Nuggets are going to be very comfortable matching up against just about anybody. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section as we are going to take our final break of the show. And when we come back on the other side, we're going to be switching gears a little bit to the NFL, as this morning the Kansas City Chiefs have made a deal to acquire wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Tennessee Titans. We're going to be talking about what type of an impact this could have on the Chiefs offense and just the overall outlook for Kansas City this season as they are off to a 6-0 start. So we're going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network, for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be diving into the news that the Kansas City Chiefs are acquiring wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Tennessee Titans. Hopkins will probably, I don't think it's off base to say this, go down as a Hall of Famer when it's all said and done. Made an All-Pro team 5 times in his career. One of the defining wide receivers of the 2010s, and was able to consistently put up production despite a mess of different quarterbacks that he has been slated to play with. Mostly so during his time in Houston, but in general as a whole, there's an extensive number of quarterbacks that he's played with. None of them have been really anywhere near as good as Patrick Mahomes currently is. So, while I understand DeAndre Hopkins is not quite the youthful wide receiver that he was for so many years, where he was able to be a consistent, 1,200 plus yard per season receiver, he can still get his numbers up there. He finished with 1,000 yards with 7 touchdowns last year with Tennessee, and that was with a couple different, quarterbacks at the helm for the Titans. So I think that this is a no-brainer move. I do really like it for the Chiefs. Is it groundbreaking? Does it change their long-term output? Probably not. But it's certainly an upgrade over what they have at this current moment, as Rashee Rice deals with injury. Rashee Rice is really the big one, I suppose. Travis Kelce having a down year at this point, as he is now on the older side, that DeAndre Hopkins should minimum be a consistently producing wide receiver for the Chiefs during the regular season, with the potential to, still bring some very real aspects to a playoff run, being a red zone threat and, being one of those intermediate guys that it's not like he's going to be tasked with, being this all-world wide receiver. He has Mahomes, which, yes, I know Mahomes has not been playing well up to this point in the season. It feels like you have to preface everything with that. I understand that he hasn't been great. I still believe in him as being the best quarterback in the NFL, and he gets a new weapon, and the Chiefs are able to do this with a pretty low asking price. It's a conditional 5th-round pick that could be converted to a 4th. I don't know the exact terms and conditions of what's required there, so maybe worst case, the Chiefs end up giving up a 4th-round pick. I think that's totally reasonable. There were some reports that according to The Athletic, that they had checked in on acquiring Cooper Kupp from the Rams, which would have been fascinating to see how that sort of would have played out. I think it would have been, frankly, a little bit unfair, assuming that Cooper Kupp is going to be healthy from here on out in the season. That deal fell through for a couple different reasons. They didn't see eye to eye on draft compensation, and then there was the financial hurdle where the Chiefs weren't able to take on the whole salary. They would have needed another partner to, carry some of that as well. So it's, that one doesn't sound like they were all that close. Very interesting thought process there. But the Chiefs understood. They were certainly in the market for a new wide receiver based off of sort of the continued stagnancy of the offense headed into this season. And there's a lot of room for growth as well. I mean, I mentioned Rashee Rice's injury because of the fact that I've also forgot about Hollywood Brown. Should be worth noting as well that he's somebody that could be around for the playoffs, as well as Rice potentially on a bit of a long shot to be available for them. So it's reinforcements, at least for the time being. And again, I think that for a day 3 pick, really not anything too hard to stomach for the Chiefs. I think it was the right decision for them. Now, in terms of what type of, a schematic impact it has on the Chiefs, I mean, they still sort of have other issues, largely being the fact that, Patrick Mahomes has been having some of these uncharacteristic interceptions and just missing throws that he usually doesn't. I heard on Get Up earlier today them talking about how, the Chiefs have this subpar offensive line. I don't know if I would really go that far. I mean, yeah, the tackles definitely leave something to be desired between Wanya Morris and Jawan Taylor, but you look at the interior of that O-line, I mean, that's an elite combination of those middle 3. So I don't think it's quite... it's certainly not as bad as Get Up seemed to make it out to be. A lot of it falls on Mahomes, which is why ultimately I think that he's going to be able to get it done. A lot of it's also on the receivers, though, of course, and just having that, lack of really reliable options downfield. I mean, as much as you can be a fan of Xavier Worthy, I think he has a lot of room to grow in terms of being a down-to-down threat. He's a little bit more of a specialist as of this point, and I think that's what he was coming into the NFL. So yeah, he'll be there for gadget plays, and he'll always be a burner for a downfield threat, but not somebody, I don't know. I mean, I didn't have him really as a first-round wide receiver coming into this year. Still a great potential that, he could sort of evolve into something more, maybe a little bit of a Tyreek Hill light. I'm not there with him right now, though. I'm sure playing in an Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes offense for the next few years is going to be enough to at least, take steps forward. They needed help along the perimeter. That's what they got. I don't really have complaints with their run game either. Kareem Hunt has done a good enough job filling in for Isaiah Pacheco. Again, that interior offensive line is pretty special. So I think that, it's really on the air game right now. And this is Patrick Mahomes where he should be able to overcome it. Been weird, though, of course, seeing, the lack of production over the course of these past couple seasons, and I think that DeAndre Hopkins certainly helps that, at least within reason. I don't think it necessarily changes what my thoughts are on this team as a whole. As of right now, they are a team that's built around their defense and is really predicated on the success of their defense. I don't know if they're necessarily talented enough offensively outside of Patrick Mahomes to be able to win shootouts. I think that, once you're getting above 30 points, that's probably where you're starting to rely a little bit more on those skill position players that I don't like quite as much. It's certainly doable when you have Mahomes at the helm, but this is a team that is able to win some of these grittier games, and Patrick Mahomes is able to come up in the big moments for them. So ultimately, the Chiefs are very much still the number one team in the NFL in my eyes. You can talk about refs, you can talk about late games and everything. I don't really care as of this moment. I mean, they have three of the more impressive wins on the season, at least from a resume perspective, in the Ravens. I would say to some degree with the Bengals and with the 49ers as well. I mean, they've beaten who they've played, and they've done so in close games. They've had some, I guess larger margins of victories. You want to look at this past weekend, or if you want to go to the Saints game, which, at that point the Saints were reeling, some for sure, but still we're showing that, at least that's when Derek Carr was healthy and there was a potential of their offense being, in the top 10-ish. Offensive line injuries definitely hindered the Saints as well. But overall, I mean, the Chiefs are the team to beat, and there's just really no denying that. I think that you are, there is denying that, I suppose, for people who are in denial, but this is what the Chiefs do. They win football games, and they can do so in a couple different ways. This move for DeAndre Hopkins maybe just sort of expands the range of, how they can win in different ways. But before we finish off the show, do want to address a quick comment here from Anthony saying, I'm assuming this is from a Dolphins perspective. What can the Dolphins get for Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill? So I'm going to have to do a little bit of research here on the contracts. I mean, the Dolphins just paid Jalen Ramsey this past offseason, which was a deal that I didn't love personally, and Jalen Ramsey has been fine this season. He's definitely had low moments. He's been a contributor on other instances. I don't think they could get very much for Jalen Ramsey at this point in his season, in his career, just to be honest, as I, again, am double checking here what the situation is for him, where Ramsey now at this point is 29. Tomorrow is his birthday, actually, interestingly enough, so turns 30 tomorrow. I think maybe you could get a second-round pick. I mean, trying to think just off the top of my head here what teams could be looking for secondary help. I mean, maybe the Ravens, but, the Dolphins aren't going to trade, I don't think, with... I don't think the Dolphins are really going to sell off, to be honest. And Tyreek Hill's another one where it's interesting. I know he had some cryptic tweets or whatnot. Tyreek is still under contract for next season, for the next 2 years, fully guaranteed next season. They have an out in 2026, but I don't think that they're going to sell off in general. I mean, you could probably get a first-round pick and some for Tyreek Hill if you do end up making that move. Jalen Ramsey, you're probably looking at more of a day 2 pick, but either way, I don't think the Dolphins are going to sell, and I don't know how many teams are going to be inquiring about Jalen Ramsey in particular. Maybe Tyreek Hill, but again, I don't know if there's necessarily a team that's out there, probably more so in the NFC. And also, if Tua is going to come back, they're not going to trade off his biggest weapon. They're going to want him to be able to come back as comfortably as possible. So, didn't really answer the question, but did as much as I could. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.